Bien, si Gary est prêt.
Okay, so if everything is ready, in that case, we can start. We always leave a few extra minutes to allow everybody to join us, our different international participants. So for those of you who are joining us, for our French speakers, I'll just repeat this. I know some of you have already heard this, so welcome to the 6th edition of our international training course of Cités Remarquables. Usually, these are organized as part of our International Week, which is held in Bordeaux each year. This year, given the situation, we have decided to hold the event, but to hold it online. And I'd like to thank the many of you, the 50 or so people who've taken part in each of the sessions. For this international training course, we have decided to have a broad subject that meets the interests of lots of different local authorities, professionals, partners in their regions, departments, counties, or countries. And this subject is knowledge and mediation activities around heritage. Why this is because it's a subject we do work on a lot at Cités et Cités Remarquables, and it is a subject which a certain number of international participants who have taken part in the past in the international training course have suggested as being a good one to be looked at in more detail. So we have decided to have two sessions on this subject, that's today and tomorrow, to look at the different possibilities to make sure that citizens do take ownership of their heritage through actions, activities, and also through places which are for them. Over the course of these last 2 days, we will have French speakers from different regions, also international speakers. This afternoon, we will have Vikram Mukong, who works at the Apravasi Ghat Trust Fund in Mauritius. And tomorrow, to conclude, we'll have Yara Kurumilian, who works for the Biladi Association in Lebanon. So to come back to today's subject, we're going to have 4 presentations. I think it will be a little simpler than yesterday. Yesterday, we had a certain number of speakers, a certain number of presentations where we had 2 speakers. Today, just 4 speakers in total. We'll be beginning with Caroline Degrave, who is the co-founder and director of the Kaleidoscope in Le Petit Quevilly in Normandy, in the north of France. That's a 3rd place. And Caroline is going to explain to you exactly what a 3rd place is. The idea was to be able to present you some experiments, varied experiments, and for the different participants today, we have representatives of local authorities in Europe, Africa, and Asia from very different places, as we saw yesterday. We had a speaker from China who was talking about a small town with 500,000 people. It's not the same scale as in many of our other local territories. So 3rd places. So but we wanted this to be complementary with other places that we will be presenting that have been developed in rural areas. And after that, we'll have a professional from the town of Fécamp, from the Archives and Heritage Department, who will be presenting something they have done to raise awareness among local people. And we'll be finishing with the Vikram Mukong in charge of an interpretation center of architecture and heritage in Mauritius. And that's at Pravasi Ghat Trust Fund. Without further ado, we're going to move on to the presentations. 20 minutes presentation each, 15 minutes for question and answers. and questions and answers. I'll hand over to Caroline Dugrave first. So I just remind you there is simultaneous interpreting at the same time as you are speaking, which Gary is doing the simultaneous interpreting for non-French speakers. You can press the button down at the bottom of your screen. And for the different speakers, the French speakers or the international participants who have any questions to ask, please do be careful not to speak too quickly. And also perhaps to avoid, especially the French people, avoid any of those acronyms we use for everything. Caroline de Graal, I'm going to hand over to you to present this heritage third place. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm going to try to share my screen now to show you some photographs of our third place.
C'est bon pour nous, juste pour
information. Okay, just for information, sometimes there can be a slight time lag. Sometimes there are a few moments between the moment where you click and the moment we see the slide. So hello, everybody. I'm Caroline de Grave, co-founder and director of a cooperative, which is called Les Copeaux Numériques, and which in 2017 created a third place, which is called the Kaleidoscope, and which is located on the right bank in Rouen in Normandy, in the north of France, about 1 hour or so from Paris. We're in a metropolitan area, a large urban area, in a municipality of 22,000 people with a very mixed population. So here you have a photograph of the place. It's a former monastery built in the 17th century. So a building which is a listed historic monument, which is property of the state, was property of the state, and was purchased about 10 years ago by the municipality of Petit-Quevilly. And we then devised this project for a third place to install in here. So we have this magnificent building. Can you hear me? Okay. There is, I don't know if it's me, but there are some connection issues. Sometimes the words are a bit mixed up. If that happens again, perhaps you could deactivate your camera. For me, it was okay. It might have been me. So don't hesitate to interrupt me if the connection isn't stable, and I'll do whatever I can to make it easier for you. So this former monastery where we conduct different activities. So the Kaleidoscope is organized around collaborative workspaces. We have offices and private workshops or shared private where we can host different self-employed workers, employees who are teleworking or different professions. And we also have fitted, equipped workshops for photography or for traditional joinery activities where people can make use of shared tools. There's also the Fab Lab for digital production with a number of different computer-controlled machines, a 3D printer, for example. So we find that sort of thing in the Fab Lab and other technologies, of course. The role of the Kaleidoscope is to provide support for all different types of people in making use of these different tools and facilities. And finally, the last space that we have is our places for socializing. It's important to have social, convivial contacts. That's the whole point of a third place. So we have a cultural cafe, and also outside we have spaces for people to sit around, to discuss, or to organize events or cultural events of all kinds. So I'll show you some views of the buildings and the interior spaces. The Kaleidoscope is a creative hub. We have a lot of creative professionals, creation professionals who work here, which is important. We have different organizations, entities, which work each day in our premises, and they're good places for meeting each other, places where people can share the space, or for formal or informal exchanges between the different users of the Kaleidoscope. So there are arts and crafts activities, but not only that. I won't go into that in more detail. It's just to explain the sort of professions who do come to work in our venue. For we've had an embroideress and crochet specialist, which is used in haute couture fashion. Claire uses this space to conduct her activity. And we have also woodworkers, carpenters, and also we've had somebody who's just arrived who makes candles. So crafts activities, we also have service professionals, service sector architects, graphic artists, French foreign language interpreters, translators. We also have project owners in the social and solidarity economy, and also industry, people working for industry, project managers for industry. So from lots of different backgrounds, but who are happy to share these spaces on a day-to-day basis and to discuss perhaps the difficulties they might encounter. All these different people work with or without digital tools. I mentioned the Fab Lab earlier. Some of them use new technology, some of them don't. We try not to have any sort of opposition between tradition and modernity and to combine all the different practices. Here you have some views of different creations by some of our co-workers or crafts people who work occasionally in our spaces to use our machines or etc. Today I'm going to talk a little bit more about all the mediation and participation activities which are specific to our third place. The project of this third place was one that we devised back in 2014. And before we created the cooperative, we had an association to prepare for it, gave us a chance to contact potential future users and to find out what people might want to find in this sort of venue. So there was this whole preparatory phase, which was organized in 2015-16. Before we settled into the old Charterhouse building, and from 2016 to 2017, we organized participatory work sites with users to clean, paint, and restore the interior of the building. What I'm going to explain more afterwards are two actions we have conducted with different audiences. A first one, a cultural activity called Family Photos, a participatory project devised with local people to promote the heritage site. So for this project, it was part of a regional program which provided us with a grant. We also had co-financing from the municipality of Le Petit-Quevilly and from the Rouen-Normandy Metropolitan Authority. So in this building where we are settled, there are lots of very high, it's surrounded by very high walls, so the local people were not familiar with the building. It was hidden away. We have transformed it to make it a public place. And so we wanted to promote the building and also to enable people to take, local people to take ownership of the venue, of this heritage site, by involving them in the artistic activities through a project working with a photographer and a street art specialist, Camille Boulard. In this project, we also wanted to promote our cultural heritage and show all the diversity of the families in the town and all types of families. So the idea was to take these photographs of local people. We launched a campaign to get people to say whether they were interested in taking part in the project. We selected 15 families so that they could come and have their photograph taken in the premises and enjoy a slightly different experience. Here you have two of those family portraits. There are also individual portraits, so everybody was allowed to express their personality under the eye of the photographer who did these magnificent black and white portraits. In total, 45 people took part in this first part of the activity, and these portraits were then put up in a large format inside the building and also around the walls, around the outside of the estate. In parallel to this, we also did some work with some graphic artists who did a fresco on one of the walls around the kaleidoscope, which something we love. It brings in light and color to the place, and it's also a way of having a very contemporary take on this heritage site. So, and there were also artistic workshops that were organized, notably to raise people's awareness of street art, graffiti. So here we worked with the youth unit of the municipality of Le Petit-Quevilly, who working with young people ages 11 to 14 who came to try wall painting and to make small items of furniture. So we did some work with them on DIY design and creation of small items. Then they went off to the Fab Lab to conduct an experiment with the digital production, things to make stencils, and then cutting them out using a laser cutting, which that's a technology we have in the Fab Lab. And then they had the opportunity to spray paint their works with the help of artist marks. So those workshops were held over the summer, and then at the beginning of October, we organized an event to report on this. So all the families which had taken part in the project were invited to discover their portraits at the kaleidoscope, and we organized with the Rouen Normandy Metropolitan Authority a visit with a tourist guide who came to present the history of the Charterhouse building in a very lively, very entertaining way. The guide was even disguised as a monk for the visit and staged the presentation, the guide, and took the families off to discover the historic building, the Charterhouse. So a very successful experience, this activity, and we realized that even people who lived very close by weren't familiar with the history of the building or with the building itself. So it was very well received by the participants, especially as we had prepared a surprise for them. And for some of them, it was the first time they had taken part in a guided visit of a heritage site. So there you have the family photos project. Now another project we're working on at the Kaleidoscope and have been since the end of 2019, which is a shared gardens project. The building is surrounded by grounds of 2,500 square meters with trees, and so far we haven't really made use of the outside spaces. Obviously, in a third place, the focus is ecology and things like that, and local production. So it was only natural that we should come up with this project for shared gardens. So similarly to what we did for the family photos, we put out a call for participants to local people. It was put on social media, and we invited the local people from the area to come and join us to discuss these shared gardens. The idea was to co-construct this with them, and that they should be able to design and imagine the garden or gardens that they would like to create. So there were a whole series of workshops which were organized in the premises, and there we worked with an association called the Champs des Possibles, which works in urban agriculture. And with the Rouen Normandy Metropolitan Authority, and the participants designed how they wanted to do these gardens, to plant vegetables or flowers depending on their preferences. We had about 30 participants in this project, of whom, let's say, a real core of about 15 people who came very regularly, or who are coming in regularly to look after the gardens, do some gardening, and also to meet and to socialize with people. So the idea is to conduct an experiment on vegetation, on plants, using the different skills that people have, which I'll explain to you a bit afterwards, and to manage the plots of land and the garden waste. We have a lot of old trees on the estate and they lose their leaves. So we have leaves, we have the grass cuttings, we have quite a lot of waste from the garden, which can be useful. And so the participants chose to work on the permaculture concept by creating sort of layers, successive layers of plant and carbon, material, which means that we don't deplete the soil. So there you have some images to make it a bit clearer for you. So here we have some participants who are creating these lasagna, the different layers. Then we also worked on composting, because in our co-working space, obviously, we have a cafeteria with co-workers who have lunch there or dinner. So we have a lot of vegetable peel and coffee, ground coffee. So rather than putting that in the household waste, we thought it would be good to create a collective composting system, which is used by the co-workers who come there for lunch and also for local people who live nearby. And so we've organized this with the organization Le Champ des Possibles on composting, how to do composting, what you can do, what you can put into the compost. And we organize these events, which are very pleasant moments for socializing, where we can taste the local produce, etc. So the idea is also to create ties between people in the district who don't necessarily see each other otherwise. So there you have the composters being built by the gardeners and being started up. The first tomatoes from the garden, that was in the summer 2020. So there are experiments, discussions, exchanges of seeds, exchanges of plants. So this activity is working well. Another experiment still linked with gardens, and which is very recent, is the installation of a vegetable gardening robot, here to try to combine tradition and innovation. which can sow and water seeds automatically. It moves along two axes in this vegetable garden plot, which was designed to go with it. And this was done with the support of the Orange Foundation and in a partnership with the Center for Technical Science and Culture and also a Chamber of Agriculture of Normandy. So the aim here was also that the use of the robot is a way of opening up the debate on the place of robotization in agriculture. So we think it's interesting to address this sort of subject in this way. And we also used the digital skills here. And we worked with a group of young people who have dropped out of school, aged between 16 and 25, who came in as part of their professional training to spend a week in the Fab Lab to build and program the robot. And that was just last week, the robot, very recent project. And the idea is to conduct comparisons with the permaculture experiment and to stimulate people's curiosity and discussions among ourselves. So those are the two big activities I wanted to present to you today. Just to conclude, I would like to say that a third place involves working with lots of different stakeholders, the local authorities, the institutions. I've listed all of these here on the screen, the different people we're working with, either on a regularly or on a one-off basis. We're also working with people in education and training, such as the training organizations themselves, also local charities, cultural associations, and also with business players and economic development stakeholders, notably in the social and solidarity economy. So it really is a place of partnership. That's one of the things that makes it so rich. This partnership takes time to be set up. It's not something you can do overnight. That's what we've been doing that's what we did over the first 3 years. We're members of several networks, the French Tech Network, the WeShare Network as well, and the Normandy Third Place Networks, and the network of French Fab Labs. So there you have an overview of our different partners over the past 3 years. Thank you very much, Caroline. Was that the end? Yep, that was it. Thank you very much, Caroline, for that presentation, which was very, very rich and interesting. Thank you for presenting things in a very practical way, presenting what a third place is, in particular a heritage 3 place. So that's something of particular interest to us here at Cités Remarquables. And we have a national focus on this subject with all our different members. And this could also be opened up to other territories around the world. We see that third places often provide a framework. They are often installed in heritage sites, so a heritage is part of it. And really goes much further than that. And I think the example of the kaleidoscope is a good example of this. Heritage can inspire different activities. And I don't know whether there will be questions about this on this subject, but if you had set up in a non-heritage building, I'm sure you would still have had arts and crafts people, but do you think you would have been able to do all these different heritage activities? Would you have had so much to do? What I find interesting is very much this place and the fact that the third place does indirectly make it possible to promote this heritage with the local population. Thank you very much for that, Caroline. And that opens up other prospects. You mentioned these activities in urban agriculture, permaculture, and we do see that a heritage site doesn't necessarily have to be for specialists of heritage. It can be open to other issues, other subjects, or other stakeholders. in crafts, the social and solidarity economy, or the economy more broadly, and other activities, much broader activities, as you showed. I propose now that we move on to the questions, either via the chat or directly. If anybody would like to, if we could leave the screen share so we can bung up the photographs of the images of everybody. Do any of you have any particular questions? Jose has a question. Yes, hello, and thank you very much for the presentation. Congratulations for what you're doing. It really is an extraordinary place. I was very struck by what you're managing to do in terms of establishing social ties between people, especially at the moment when it's so difficult. So really, this idea in particular, which marked me very much, of photographs, the portraits of people, of the families. I was just trying to remember, but I think I saw an experiment like that somewhere, but I'm not capable of remembering where it was. But in any case, it's magnificent to be able to recreate those social ties, that social cohesion at the current time. I have two small questions for you. One, I think perhaps for our international friends, you have a cooperative status, if I've understood correctly. Could you perhaps explain to us very briefly why this status as a cooperative rather than as a non-profit association, why it's important for you? And also, as I'm very interested in questions of urban agriculture, I know that you couldn't go into the subject more here, but what is the importance of this sort of thing? Is it just an activity to create social ties, or in terms of, from an economic point of view, in terms of the, do people pick the vegetables themselves? Do you sell the products that they grow in the gardens? And what does that represent in terms of volumes? Or is it really just to have the socialization activities? Thank you. Okay, thank you for those questions. So we are a cooperative, we are a company in the social and solidarity economy. So it's halfway between a company and an association. So it's the employees who handle the governance of the company. And it was important that the employees should play a role in the governance. And in cooperatives, in the cooperative, I am a manager, but I'm elected by the employees for a certain period of time. So if they're not happy with my management, they can unelect me. What else could we say? The cooperative status, I think, is a very promising one for the future for activities in the general interest. We would like to transform the cooperative into a commercial company of collective interest, which is another status, which also enables us to involve other stakeholders, local people, for example, also local authorities, and why not suppliers or others. So that's one of our objectives in the medium to long term. On the question of urban agriculture, the shared garden project is very recent. It only started at the end of 2019. Then we had the first lockdown, which made things a bit complicated. Then we got back down to work after the lockdown, which was in May, June. So it really is a first, an initial experiment. The initial idea wasn't so much to do with economic commercial activity. The idea was really to create social cohesion and ties between local people, many of whom live in high-rise buildings and don't necessarily have any land where they can grow things or touch the soil. And we'll see then with the arrival of the robot, whether that changes anything. But the idea really is to create ties between people and to discuss discuss social issues. Thank you very much for that very detailed answer. I'm just looking at the chat at the same time. And there are congratulations from our different participants saying that the presentation really was very enriching, inspiring. Comments there from lawyer, from Lebanon, from Democratic Republic of Congo, and from China. Do any of you have any questions? I see one popping up just as I'm speaking from Sabina Maslic, who works in Travnik in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And the question is in English, so I will translate it. So are people using the co-working space, do people using the co-working space pay anything as a sort of rent? Or do they offer some sort of activity or education in return? And the second question is, what is your method for selecting who gets to use the facility and when? So on the access to the co-working, this is a commercial activity, which then enables us to finance the cultural activities, the gardens, etc. So we're an economy, a company of the social and solidarity sector. So the access to co-working is something that people pay for. We have different packages, different formulas, ranging from 50 euros a month to 350 euros a month if you want to have a private office with a large floor area. So that's for the co-working. We're thinking increasingly about setting up a system of exchanges, non-monetarized exchanges of services. So one person will help somebody to design their logo, and in return, someone will do something else. So exchanges of services, not for money. Those are things we're looking into, and we're trying to work on that subject. I'm not enough of an expert yet to give you any practical examples. For the selection of the co-workers, at the start of the project, as always, I would say, we did a call for applications for the private offices. So we received different applications from bodies or organizations. And we tried to assess their ability to cooperate and to collaborate with other people, because we have a co-working space which is a bit like a flat share. So it can work well, but there can also be friction between the different people who are sharing the property. If somebody starts telephoning and loudly when somebody else is trying to concentrate on a complicated task, it can be a bit irritating. So there are people who have left. But I say from the beginning, there was a sort of a core group. There have been some failures, but on the whole, that's also how this sort of place works. So we're a sort of laboratory where we're trying to get everybody to work together, to be together, and we'll see how that turns out. So the selection tends to be on human criteria. We want people who want to share, but perhaps not to dominate too much. So it's all very well to have collective activities. There also have to be individual activities when people need to concentrate on their own thing. It's not just exchanging all the time. So it's a bit awkward, but it's great fun. I'll just pass on another question from Joseph Michalek, who is the owner of the property. And have you needed to rebuild any parts of the building? The owner of the building is the city of Le Petit-Quevilly. We rent the building, a commercial lease, a standard commercial lease for companies in France, which has a duration of 9 years in three-year periods. It's rented to us at a low, affordable rent. When we arrived, we did about 50,000 euros worth of work to get the building compliant with the standards and also to get it right for our activities. We updated the electricity, we put in circuit breakers, etc., for the electrical system. The second, what was the second part of the question? Could you just repeat it again? I've forgotten. It was whether you needed to rebuild any parts of the building. No, we didn't do any big construction work, mainly minor things. We did some participatory work sites where we had about 50 participants over several weekends doing work, and in a building like ours, which is almost 1,000 square meters with all the outbuildings, we needed lots of people to help us. And an additional question from José: do you manage to earn your living and to make it profitable? We closed our we just closed our fourth fiscal period of accounts. We had for the first 3 years, we had a deficit, which is covered by our own funds. And therefore, the first time we had a positive result. So there have been a lot of sacrifices, like with any launch. I think the first 3 years are always difficult for any activity, but we have chosen to employ people, to recruit, to create jobs. And from next year, I should also be paid. Are there any other questions before we move on to our second speaker of the day? Any other questions from our international participants?
N'en vois pas, je regarde sur tout.
I don't see any. I'm just checking everything. Thank you, Caroline, for that presentation and for answering the questions that were asked. I'll take this opportunity, as for the other speakers, I'll pass on your contact details to the different participants from today. Some of them may have questions, additional questions they would like to ask you, and so I will pass your email on if they need any additional info. With pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Caroline. So I now propose, so we've seen Le Petit Quevilly, the kaleidoscope, which is a third place in Le Petit Quevilly, in a town, as Caroline said, of about 22,000 people. We're now heading off to a more rural, off into the countryside near Bordeaux, to Saint-Macaire. Guitry de Galard, the president of the Simone et les Mouragas collective, is going to present her third place, which really focuses on crafts, art and crafts activities. And this is something we also wanted to go into during this training session, because in many countries which are present here, I'm looking at the screen, whether it be in the Republic of North Macedonia, in Lebanon, in Mali, in Romania, the crafts activities are a very important part of culture. In France too, but in France in recent years there have been a certain number of losses, and I have the impression, you're more of a specialist than I am, Guitry, but I have the impression that perhaps we're seeing a certain return towards these subjects with new activities and new places which are being created. And the example of this third place, which I think you're going to present, is an illustration of this trend. And I'll ask you to speak now. I think you have a presentation you're going to share with us on the screen. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting us here. We're a small collective in the Gironde, in a medieval town in France. And while I'm speaking, I'm also going to try to share my screen if I can get the thing to work, just to show you where we are. That should do the trick. It has. So Saint-Macaire in Gironde, 40 kilometers from Bordeaux towards the southeast, near the Garonne River, with in a medieval town with a very rich heritage. The town of Saint-Macaire is on a rocky outcrop and looks down onto the river, and it is in inter-municipal authority of 38 municipalities. Not those 38 municipalities, Saint-Macaire is one of 2,200 people. It's the second largest town in this local authority area. A very rich heritage, as I said. I've put some photographs in just to show you. It's important that you do understand this, because the project we have set up didn't emerge here just at random. It's a place with a lot of heritage potential. We have this medieval town with its priory, its church. Everything was built around the church with exceptional architecture. And in the village, or in the town, I should say town, in France officially, if you have 2,000 people, you're a town. The medieval town reached its peak back in the Middle Ages, but was also in the 18th and 19th century. The stone from the town was used. They dug quarries under the town to build houses in Bordeaux. And just for your information, these quarries, until the 1950s, were used for nightclubs where lots of people could go and meet and dance, etc. Today, Saint-Macaire, I'll continue if I can get the slides. So here you have the layout of the town from above. So it's a heritage site with a certain number of listed historic buildings. And in the town, there are a lot of people, and these people for the past 30 years, there's been a trend in the population, a change in the population, a change in the population, as if it was a sort of breeding ground for associations to express themselves. The town is not a very rich town. As you can see, it's a small place, and we cover a small area. There aren't a lot of companies, a few crafts companies, 2 hotels, 4 restaurants, a cafe, some shops, a gym, but most of all in Saint-Macaire, there is a very rich association and clubs life. There are 50 non-profit associations in a place with just a population of 2,000 in lots of different areas. So it ranges from associations in the area of culture. There is a music school, for example, which is a charity which has been here for 30 years. There is a twinning committee. We have a twin city in Sardinia in Italy. There is an association which organizes medieval celebrations. As we're in a medieval town, they organize reconstitutions. There are also sports clubs, like in any town: cycling, aikido, judo, fast track, grass track, gymnastics, rambling or hiking. There are also associations in the area of recreational activities. There is a games library, dance activities, pétanque, bowls, pottery, an old people's club, and also activities for social activities. There is one association for the parents of the children at the school. There's also a local agricultural association, environmental protection association, and Simon and our association, which I'm going to talk to you about now, the collective which we are, to tell you who that, to present the collective. You have some photographs and a place. And I'll come back to this. The collective is made up of people, real people. And this third place is in a building in the heart of the center of the medieval town. We're in a building of the 17th century, which has two floors, a downstairs and upstairs. Downstairs, we have a shop, which is a display window for our crafts activities and creations. Upstairs, you have a gallery, and you have a photograph there where you can see how that is laid out, which is where we hold our meetings. When we can hold meetings at the moment with the COVID. And then you also have upstairs on the first floor, you see the little opening there, a shared workspace which hosts people who are doing teleworking or who are self-employed. It can also be used for training sessions or for meetings, notably those of the Chamber of Arts and Crafts of the Gironde. So how is the collective set up? The collective was created because initially we were a group of craftspeople, designers, creators, most of us being women. Lots of women, joined later by a few men, whose central concern was the important thing for us was to promote the arts and crafts professions and skills. Our objective is to create social cohesion, social ties, to take part in the economic and cultural development of our local territory. We also had a vision from the beginning, from the very beginning, a political vision for a society where everyone must participate actively in improving our environment, our close environment. And that means mobilizing people, making choices, making decisions together. So for this, we created an association, a non-profit association entity, a collective, to try to make this approach a reality. So to present why we chose arts and crafts, this can cover lots of different things. You saw with the kaleidoscope, we're not all arts and crafts people, but the overall approach here is that this is a living heritage which embodies men and women who work, who have know-how, who have skills. And our objective is to fight against isolation in the isolation of these people, of these craftspeople, artists and craftspeople, and also to enable them, to allow them an income from their activity. So in the activities, the arts and crafts activities, there is a list, a precise list of these. Not everybody is an artist. So we have a glass maker who works on glass. We have a stained glass worker, ceramists, a leather worker, a creator of lights or light shades. We also have engravings, line engravings, and also upholstery, which isn't always considered really a crafts activity. And then around that, we have a certain number of other artists and craftspeople, sculptors, for example, who work with us. And what we have come to realize is that all of these people who work in arts and crafts are choosing a professional activity which is one which is precarious. They have a certain socio-professional isolation in their activity. They are in a lot of solitude. Often they're very short on resources, lack time, and do not have all the skills that they need for their activity. So despite their know-how, despite their skills, they're not necessarily really in a position or to act like entrepreneurs. They're not necessarily people who know how to do entrepreneurship. It's not because you're an arts professional that you know how to do these things. And so all these professions, all these people, with all these people, we come to realize that they needed a collective structure or entity, and it's not easy. It's not something, it's not frequent to bring all these different sorts of arts and crafts together with artists as well. And that's, we're not elitist in any way. The idea wasn't to be elitist or to limit the people we allow in. And what we did is that we decided to develop an activity, an economic activity in a rural area. Obviously, we're near Bordeaux, but the idea here was to consolidate employment, to create jobs in our local area, out in the countryside, not just for the collective itself, but we have an employee, but the crafts people we have and creators, we have some of them have managed to develop their activities, and some of them can even earn their living doing that. And we want to promote this know-how and to help these artists to become more professional. But we're also working in a medieval town with a great heritage value. And our objective is also to contribute to revitalizing the town centre of Saint-Macaire, the town, even if the town centre is a place, a public space, where you have the different associations which organize things. We wanted to create local commercial activity that's there all year round, and that also gave rise to this idea of the third place. We didn't call it a third place at the beginning. We wanted to create a place, not necessarily a third place, and to create the social ties, to encourage social mixing and exchanges between all the different audiences who are present in the town. So to do this, we developed two components, one for the general public with the craftspeople, the art gallery, and doing awareness raising activities in arts and crafts. And then a more professional dimension where we worked in partnership with a cooperative of entrepreneurs with to create an incubator where people in arts and crafts can develop their activities. And we also created a place for new companies, and we also work on tutorship. So all these different partnerships have been set up thanks to, in fact, in 2015, it started in 2015 because there was that collective energy and we received guidance. And in fact, we answered a call for projects, a call for expressions of interest for experimentation in the Aquitaine region, for in the area of social innovation. So at the very beginnings of the social and solidarity economy, and there we received an allowance, and we put together our project, designed it, and then we were lucky enough to receive support to develop our project. To come back to two projects, I don't know, I haven't kept an eye on this. You've got 5 minutes left for your presentation. Okay, I'm going to have to go very, very quickly then if I only got 5 minutes. So we imagined two types of project. First of all, awareness raising around arts and culture. The first thing we did was that we decided to create an artistic pathway for young people from the primary school in Saint-Macaire. The idea was to enable children to discover works of art in a different manner, and also to do awareness raising in addition to their pedagogical activity in class, to organize encounters with artists. And there were some extraordinary things that happened. So this has been something we've been doing since 2016. Today, so 4 years ago, now for 4 years, the children have been going to the exhibitions and seeing the different activities of the collective. And so today, when they go past, they are aware of our presence, aware of culture, and they are capable of looking at a poster and saying, oh, there's a new exhibition and it's going to be of interest to me. I can go and see it. So here for the awareness raising activities in 2019, we hosted more than 560 children in the gallery and in our activities. In 2020, which has been a complicated year for everyone, we could only do the activities in January and February for this awareness raising operation. And so I'll continue. I'll show you very quickly the sort of thing that this means, the awareness raising activity with the children here with an illustrator. And just to say that for the detail, we imagined this, we took photographs, we prepared the design, we took very good photographs of the children. Worked on hunting out the details in the work of the artist, and the artist explained how they work. So there you have some photographs of our awareness raising activities. And just to conclude very quickly on the second action we have conducted, which was the 6th edition, which should have been held in 2020. Each year we organize on the first Sunday in April a large event in the heart of the town, where the aim is to have activities, arts and crafts activities for the general public, with a chance to try workshops free of charge for children and adults alike, so as to pass on this know-how and to get people to touch these things, to try them, get people to meet, to discuss, to talk together, all in a spirit of conviviality and socializing, which is very important because that is what has built our success and drawn attention from outside the area through this activity. So that I'm sorry for going over time, but there you have it. No problem. We have a few minutes left no, you have 2 minutes left, but we'll use that for the questions from the participants. Thank you very much for that presentation, which was very rich, and for those photographs, which were very interesting and which show all the creativity. This local creativity, I particularly appreciated the fact you're linking this in with the revitalization of the local territory. Perhaps you could stop sharing your screen so that we can see our participants. Just to explain, you used 2 abbreviations which weren't explained. And AMAP and IDAC, could you just explain to them what they are? So an AMAP is a short circuit farm produce association. So it is an association for maintaining peasant farming. So it's a cultural activity in France, which helps to develop local agricultural activities, which can include lending farming equipment. So I will pass on the questions which arrive through the chat. The first of these comes from Tony Saadi in Lebanon. Thank you very much for that very rich presentation. Is there a marketing plan for marketing all these different activities, and what do you base that marketing effort on? To answer that, we would need to have a marketing team. And I'm saying that because I'm the voluntary president of the organization. Until now, we had 3 employees. Now we just have 1, which means that we don't have marketing development or to market our arts and crafts activities, but I would answer that the commercialization of these activities for the public, and our intention is that that people should take ownership of art, and that there shouldn't be any need to be rich, wealthy, I don't know what the right term is, or everybody can buy or acquire an arts or crafts item. So the aim is also to help people who work in these activities in response to demand from consumers. Obviously, art and consumption, that doesn't always go together, but for us, but we want these crafts, activities, and consumers to come together. And now, when you're talking about consumers, are they mainly local people, people who live in Saint-Macaire, or does it extend to a broader area? Obviously, we don't just cover the town of Saint-Macaire, which it's a town which is not very wealthy, and we therefore sell locally. And but locally, but outside Saint-Macaire, in the intermunicipal area, and also in Bordeaux, for example. As I am speaking, there are, I think, 10 of our craftspeople who go to markets in Bordeaux, in a third place called Darwin, where they go to create their creations. For the two speakers, in the two presentations, you talked about teleworking. Our third place is the ideal place for developing teleworking. What sort of equipment do you find there? For teleworking, you need a good internet connection. You also need working spaces with ergonomic chairs. We've worked a lot on the quality of the workspaces and the way they're fitted out, and co-construction with the future users, because we do realize that we can avoid physical disorders if we have comfortable seats, the right position at our desk. And also there's a photocopier. You need a photocopier in a shared space with a multifunction photocopier scanner, which can means you can make copies or scan large volumes of documents. I'm probably forgetting other things, but that's some of the equipment. Perhaps Kitri could add. I could add. In our shared workspace, it's very small. The third place really is a place where people can come to work together. It's to avoid being isolated. So we have a very good internet connection. However, we don't really have ergonomic workspaces for them to do their activities in, but there's always somebody who's present, and that's often what people come looking for in our third place. That's what they're coming for. They're coming for that human contact. Christophe, a question. In my hands, I have a book called Enrichissement, a criticism of merchandise by two sociologists who made a lot of noise a couple of years ago. And in one of the chapters, it talks about the collection of movement for collections, and in another chapter, they talk about crafts activities, and they used to produce knives in this place, French, but then they started importing them from China, but now they're protected by the European Union. The crafts items are protected by the European Union. So this book was one which drew a lot of attention a couple of years ago, but couldn't we say that you have a theme on which you want to develop your crafts activities on a given theme? And the second question linked with this is that you have someone here who worked for the mayor of Gassilly in Morbihan, who has shops everywhere in Europe, who does cosmetics. I've forgotten. Nobody knows his name. So what's the question? Do you have contacts with other towns of arts and crafts in France, which perhaps have made a success of their training and development through craftspeople? And some of these towns now attract a lot of visitors. As soon as it's raining on the coast, people come to these towns to visit. So do you have contacts with other places who do similar activities? Or do you work on a particular theme? If I'm not the mayor of my town, the mayor of Saint-Macaire was my town, so I do have I do have some connections, but that's not why we were helped. Quite the contrary, because just for your information, the amount of our subsidy has gone up since my husband is no longer the mayor of the town. But I think the question you're asking is the links between crafts and the local authorities. Our initiative is really a non-profit association which is totally free and independent. The local authority has decided to provide us with some money, but doesn't really make use of us to develop its tourism activities. I can't speak for those who manage the town, but what I can say is that there are two medieval towns in Gironde. There is Saint-Emilion and there is Saint-Macaire. In Saint-Macaire, there are 2,200 people, and fortunately, we don't have 1 million visitors a year. We live in our heritage, and the people, the men and women who make up our collective, are men and women who live here now, who consume here and now. And our objective is to sell and to raise awareness among people who are around us and near us. And that has been the aim from the beginning. So these are different themes. So the local authority, the town hall, helped us from the beginning by giving us a grant, a subsidy, but without there being any sort of call for projects or anything like that. The most important support we receive for the collective is the confidence in us, placed in us by the new Aquitaine region, which selected us in a call for projects, and that's how we have managed to develop our activities. I hope I answered your question anyway. Caroline, would you like to add something that you would on this? I would agree with Guitry. It's the same for us. We're an independent initiative. We want to stay independent. And I think that's probably why things work well with Town Hall. It's a win-win situation. They have these pleasant premises which can be used And we also bring positive externalities in the territory. It's a very healthy, positive relationship. But we want to stay independent and agile and quick, because with local authorities, things aren't always very agile. And we are not hosted in a municipal building. For us, we're in a building which has been renovated and which is private property, where we pay rent. The help of the municipality, to give you an idea, in euros, grant we received was 2,500 euros, and now it's gone up to 3,000 euros. We get 3,000 euros a year from the municipal authority of Saint-Macaire. So our two big partners are the Department of the Gironde, which gives us a subsidy, an operating subsidy for cultural activities, and the new Aquitaine region, which gives us a subsidy for the development of the social and solidarity economy. Thank you very much. I think there was another question just before I hand over to Mr. Martin. A quick comment. The first comment I would like to make is the importance of clubs and associations in France, because here in Central Europe, where I work, the history of the place is fairly specific, and if there isn't this rich fabric of non-profit associations, the two examples we've just seen, and notably in a very small village like Saint-Macaire, in our countries, in France, this sort of association, I think, there are a lot of such clubs and associations, charities, which I think has its importance for France. And obviously people who live in that perhaps don't really appreciate it each day, because it seems normal. But when you're living in other countries where you don't have that fabric of non-profit associations, you realize the extent to which it is important in a democracy. But I'll stop there because it's something I could talk about for hours. And I think it's a very important subject in today's world. I have two quick questions for Kitri. What I find very striking is that what you do is fantastic. For people to, if you could go a little more slowly, I apologize. So I was just saying that on these questions of local territory, there are fundamental importance to be able to develop our territory, to consume, produce, and live locally. I think it's of great importance for questions of energy also. So it's a very important subject, but developing these local activities important. So the questions for you, Kitri, are, it is quite extraordinary. How do you explain in your local area that you do have these dynamic associations? It seems quite incredible. And the second question is, does this dynamism have consequences? You talked about the trend in the population of your local territory. Does it change the population or trends in the population? And a final very small question, because I organize twinning operations. If you would like, if either of you are interested in twinning operations in Central Europe, I would be delighted to contribute. Sorry, Jonathan, for going on. First question was about what? How do you explain that you have these dynamic associations? I don't have an explanation for you. I don't know, but what I can say, however, is that I have lived in Saint-Macaire now for more than 25 years. I arrived here and I've always been involved in clubs and associations, but I'm not alone in that. Saint-Macaire is a town where everything is possible and always has been. If you want to do something, if you want to develop a project, if you want to do something, if you're feeling enthusiastic, if you want to share things, you go to see the town hall and they give you some money, a grant. That's basically the way it works. That has been the policy of the town for years and years in Saint-Macaire, and I hope it won't change. I hope that we're not going to start organizing formal programming and organizing. What I'm saying here is political. I hope we're not going to make this too formal. We mustn't lose the power of these associations. In Saint-Macaire, we have a remarkable heritage. It is an outstanding and important heritage site, and I hope we will always stay true to the idea that it is a town and that this town cannot just be open for mass tourism. Thanks to COVID, we're perhaps going to start addressing the right questions. The second question I've forgotten, however. What was it? Josie? The twinning. There was the twinnings. There was the twinning. That was the last question. It was about the dynamics. Do these dynamic associations have any impact on the population or the population trends of the type of people you attract? There has been a big renewal of the population. The difficulty today is that in our association, we're trying to do that is to get very different people living together. Because in Saint-Macaire, I'm going to end up simplifying a little bit here, but you have a population of people who are in difficulty. You have what we call the Bordeaux people who left Bordeaux to come and live in the village. You have lots of civil servants because here in this area, the main employers are the education system, the big hospital nearby. And you also have a private school which attracts people who want to put their children in this traditional Catholic school. So you have a mix of all sorts of different people. And this is something I feel very enthusiastic about. It's really a place where everything is possible. We have the space for people. There is the heritage. There are still affordable houses in the old town centre that people can buy for a reasonable price. There is space there for people to breathe and to do things and to innovate and to try things and to commit to doing good things. Thank you very much. And I propose now that we thank Caroline and Kitri for your presentations, which were very interesting. We see that heritage and arts and crafts activities and can be a real driver of social cohesion, social ties in very diverse populations with different activities. So today we've had cooperatives, private players, but you have also talked about the support of the municipality and the department and the regional authority, and these heritage third places which are being developed are very varied, and there are places, hybrid places for partnerships, exchanges, and thank you to you for presenting all of that. I suggest now that we move on to a speaker from a local authority, Manuel Martin, head of the Archives and Heritage Department of the town of Fécamp. Fécamp is back in Normandy, a very rich history linked to the sea and to industry. And in Fécamp, they have done a lot of work on awareness raising in the population on heritage issues. Caroline, you talked about your family portraits, and in Fécamp, they have also been doing some very interesting work on the archives and heritage and how to share that history with local people and get them to play an active role in that shared community memory. So I'll hand over to you, Manuel Martin. Hello, everybody. So this is my very first Zoom meeting. I hope I'm going to manage this technically and explain. Thank you to the first two participants who presented a lot of different notions of heritage that I will be referring to. In my case, my main objective for my employer, the municipality, is to raise the awareness of heritage in the local population and to get them involved in that heritage, because there is a fragility in that heritage which is linked to fishing activities in Newfoundland off the coast of Canada. And these activities, which were the basis of many families, families of sailors who would cross the Atlantic Ocean to go fishing while their wives kept everything running at home, wasn't really present anywhere. There wasn't anything really. We didn't have the archives or the information to work on and to get the population involved. So what I am going to present is the work done by my department, the resources we're working with to promote this heritage. We aren't yet having to fight off the waves of tourists yet here, but I think there is a genuine local expectation. There has been, when fishing activities stopped 33 years ago, there was nothing really to mark that change, and families stopped passing down this culture. Now we've reached the second or third generation, people who want to know about these people who were engaged in these fishing activities, their wives, and how the families were structured and organized. So if I press, I think, on shared screen, I hope this will work. There we are. It's appearing on the screen. And don't forget that we have an interpreter who is translating simultaneously at the same time that you are speaking. So if you could, avoiding too quickly, and so just to allow the interpreter to breathe from time to time. If I can you see the image on the screen? Yes, but you need to go for the big screen, full screen presentation. Down at the bottom, you should have that. There we are, and I'll hand over to you for the next 15 minutes. Originally, I'm in charge of the archives department. We merged with the heritage department in 2015 to combine together our historic sources and the people working in promoting those sources. The aim was to promote our heritage and to define what we meant by that heritage. We don't always have the same interpretation of what heritage is, and our sensitivities and sensibilities can change. So we wanted to share this heritage with people. In our department, there are 5 employees, 1 contractual employee, and 16 guides on casual employment contracts. Last year, before COVID, we had 31,700 people who benefited from these services of the department. 1,117 groups came, 417 school groups and 507 adult groups. And total income from ticketing activities of about 106,000 euros. So for a local authority like ours, it's an investment, but it's also a way of boosting, raising our profile in the local region and among the population. To do this, we needed something to work with. The first was inaugurated 3 years ago, a new museum. A rather interesting space which retraces all the history of the town of Fécamp and the surroundings since the Middle Ages, right the way through to the end of the years of the long haul fishing, the transatlantic fishing. A very classical museum, but which is a way of promoting the territory. There is also something else in 2015, thanks notably to our contacts with a local photographer, Jean Cremy, who's a member of the Magnum agency and a member of the French Academy. He puts in contact with a photographer who sold us his collection of photographs. It cost 35,000 euros. For a town like Fécamp, that is a certain cost. And that was then an opportunity it was an extraordinary historical source, mainly negatives. The oldest photographs from 1870, the most recent from 2006. We bought 12,000, an estimation of 12,000 negatives for 35,000 euros. And all in all, there are 100,000 views. We have the whole of the history of Fécamp and its region since the creation and the opening of the photography activities at the end of the 19th century. So, along with this, there was a second collection which was given, all the identity portraits which had been done in that shop since 1945. Each negative is numbered, identified. We have the names, addresses. So we have a photo library of the whole region showing all the important moments in the lives of people and notably the local sailors. So we found ourselves with over 200,000 photo negatives. In our collection, it's totally disproportionate in relation to the size of our department, but it really is something which is very rich. So we prepared a room a bit like to show the population these portraits and to give a new dimension to these portraits, as each of these portraits tells a story. There has been an urban renovation program also, and occasionally during that work we demolish buildings to make our districts more modern, not to define new living areas. Sometimes we demolish buildings, but when we demolish buildings, we're demolishing people's history and their lives. And we have some areas of the town which may seem ugly. But behind these buildings, there are people's lives. And with these photographs for one of the buildings that was demolished, we created a gallery of portraits of the people, the 3,000 people who lived there. So what you see here on the right of the screen is the gallery of portraits of the former people who lived in the building, and their portraits were in the gallery. We didn't forget, the building has disappeared, but their history is now part of our local heritage. And the lady you see in the middle here gave us all the archives of her uncle, who was a fishing boat captain in Newfoundland. So you see this notion of passing down this history. She understood this, and these were unique documents which she gave to the municipal archives so that we could share that history with people. So they're also very rich contacts with the population that come here for, to show that their family was here in this district on a plateau next to Fécamp after the Second World War. Not easy to give a cultural dimension to this, while also including the memory of these families through these portraits. If, and also today, if our guides in 1900, 901, 2 or 3, there were 70 or so fishing boats going off fishing off the coast for 9 months at a time off the coast of Newfoundland in Canada. So this is something. But here, what you see here is the hibernate is the winter storage of the boats. I'm thinking for young people who have no awareness that there was ever this sort of activities here, as these were all sailing boats, can you imagine the number of masts on these boats, the masts, the ropes and everything that we see? And so there were also all the activities revolving around this. So how do you represent a forest of masts?
Voilà.
So here in 1901, you have the port of Fécamp with that forest of ships' masts and the small boats, which were called Dorises, which had been imported from North America. These are from the negatives, which we can then print. So these photographs have been enlarged and we installed them in the port of Fécamp in a format of 2 meters by 2 meters so that people who are out strolling can discover them and enjoy them. Similarly, the quality of these images, here you have a boat from Fécamp which is being tugged along by a pilot. But you see all the details, the costumes and the work that this involves. And it's important to be aware of this work. These images share that with us. And again, the port and the preparation of the fishing campaign. But here with a change, it's no longer the same boats. Here we're seeing the steam boats emerging. And if we continue, we reach another period, the same port, but in the 1950s, the Second World War is now finished, and there had been lots of destruction and lots of rebuilding. And this was at the end of the 1970s. It's the beginning of the end. There is a new society, a new economy, which is taking shape. And what we see here is the beginning of the end of the whole adventure. In those years, nobody dared to imagine this could come to an end. And the paradox is here that there are far fewer boats, but the boats are fishing more. So the industry has changed. And then if you want to have a look at the portraits, here the sailors who went on these fishing campaigns would always go and have photographs taken before they left, most of them wearing their cap. And in this small gallery of portraits, you have 3 captains, 3 famous captains. You have cabin boys, sailors, and we can follow the life of certain sailors through their portraits, and that's also a pleasure for the families to rediscover these images, because these identity photographs have been stapled or stuck to papers, often have been lost. Most of the members of the families weren't familiar with these photographs, and so it's an occasion to go and see who these people were, what their life was like, what the ship was they sailed on, what happened. And on the wall of image you have here, there's just one sailor who is still alive. So it's also fragile. And another example of a retrospective, here we have all the scenes of departing for Newfoundland. The population would come for this very emotional moment to see, sometimes see members of their family, and to remember the idea of this. I did an exhibition called Those Who Leave and Those Who Remain, notably the women, who are often forgotten in this history. But through these images, we can pay tribute to them. And in the religious buildings, and notably the chapel, which is above the basin of the port, there is stained glass. And here there are often references to shipwrecks. Next year, we're going to mark the 70th anniversary of a very bad year. 2 trawlers were sunk, 2 trawlers from the port. And thanks to these photographs, I present Louis Beaufort, who said he's a cabin boy. It's the first time he was sailing, May 1950, and he goes on board for the summer campaign on the La Ginette Le Borgne boat. In June 51, that boat hits another. 16 sailors are lost at sea. He survives. I have met him, and I said to him, but how did you manage to get back, to return fishing after the accident? And he said, but we didn't have the choice. That was how we earned our living. And I also found the photograph from his wedding in 1955. And I told this story, and I introduced Mr. Beaufort to a documentalist from who was preparing a documentary and included him and his wife in his documentary, who talked about their life, the reality of their life for the sailors back in those days and for their wives. I should point out that you have just 5 minutes left. So Frédéric Brunkel made an extraordinary documentary, and there was a premiere which was held in Fécamp, and Mr. Beaufort came with his wife, with their children and their grandchildren. One of his daughters lives in Abu Dhabi, so it was extremely moving. On the evening when the film was premiered, all the family came to attend the projection of the film in which they were present. Mr. and Mrs. Beaufort are both very old. They're still in good health, but old. They're still okay, but there will come a time when their life, their story needs to be passed on to future generations. So that's also the point of all this, also for Normandy, for the region. The reconstruction after the Second World War it's difficult to have views of this. Here you have the beach of Fécamp in 1939. After the war, there's the destruction and reconstruction. Here you have the cod drying plants and the industry linked to the cod drying. And here you have another factory, which is now a museum. It was the last building left of these fisheries buildings, which is now the museum that I was talking about at the beginning. When we talk about these North Atlantic fishing activities, you have the cod from a single trawler, and there were 3 buildings like this Each pile is 1 ton of fish, and each trawler had several hundred tons of fish on board. So when we talk about the over-exploitation of fisheries, we understand that here, what we're talking about. And then there's the notion of this work before things were mechanized. And the advantage in these collections is we have the photographs showing how people worked. And what you see here can be associated with other. Also, we can look at information like the occupational accidents that happened at work, the women who were working on the fish who were paid per unit for their production. So they needed to avoid being injured. And if they hurt themselves, it's that they weren't good at what they were doing. And what's interesting is that we also see the evolution over time, the economic change. So here it's no longer salt fish, which is unloaded, but frozen, which is then chopped and cut for industrial production, which reduces the number of people working. And these images enable us to work to address these questions. So this physically difficult, painful work in the 1950s, in the 70s, changes to this work on the production lines, but with the work clothing, and then until these companies disappeared. But it's an economic activity which was the basis of the life of many people here. And the same thing here. You can also see the work in the fields. Here it's harvest time in the 1950s. Magnificent, almost like postcards, picture postcards. And then little by little, the images change, and we see the beginnings of mechanization as agriculture becomes more mechanized and people move to the towns to work in other activities. And harvesting is no longer a village fete or festival. We have just 2 people on a tractor here doing the harvesting, and after that just 1. And then the use of chemical products. So these images also show us the different aspects of life and provide this visual insight and also a source of memories for local people. The last thing to conclude, in the portraits, we have the portrait of this lady who in 1950 came for a photograph to put on her card as a political resistant and internee, and she has on her lapel the red triangle is that of the people who were deported to the camps during the war. She was a member of the Communist Party who were transported with Marie-Claude Vaillant-Couturier. So here we had 2 people from FICA in this convoy to the camps, and she is the only one who survived and came back from deportation. I went yesterday for a presentation in a middle school to talk about these people who were deported to the camps during the war. And we now have the portrait of this woman. Her husband was shot for his resistance, and showing this image because here we see this lady died in 1990, and she has the number which was tattooed on her in the camp. And it's important that we have this portrait, a woman who survived. And we have the portraits, and the member of the family said to me, yes, that's my aunt. I'll send you the photograph of her. And this was taken a couple of weeks before she died. And I said, why did nobody ever interview her or question her? But she said, but even we didn't dare to ask her the questions we would have liked to. So we see how fragile things are from these images, which are important in finding information, structuring presentations, and getting schools and today's people involved, people who had never heard of this woman who was arrested in Fécamp in 1942 during the war. So with these images, we have all sorts of different emotions, things of interest which emerge. And it's something which is indispensable for us. It's a part of us, and it enables us to show something of interest to school groups. I hope I didn't go on too long. I'd have quite happily gone on longer, but there you have it. We forget in regions like ours, which are in economic difficulty here, we get images which show us not necessarily that it was better before, because it was difficult, but it was different. True, everybody had a job, but those jobs were difficult. And in 1968, when the working classes rebelled, it was that they wanted a possibility to have some income and to be able to live correctly. So we're not trying to generate nostalgia here, but we're showing the changes, the quick change that occurred over a period of 30 or 50 years. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Mr. Martin, for that presentation. Which shows that an image says more than 1,000 words, and it's true. It's a very sensitive presentation of the heritage, the history of the town, in a way which is very... So if you could stop sharing your screen so that we can then see our different participants, and I think there may well be questions from... I'm a bit lost there. I see some comments arriving in the chat. I have a question. So a visitor center represents a lot of investment. Is it profitable for you? Our objective is to safeguard what we have bought. We bought 12,000 negatives. For a municipal archive department, it's complicated. We're trying to save those assets. Next. We're not really a photographic agency which is there to sell the photographs, but we need to think about what we want to do. We do receive requests. I'm currently working with a painter from the Navy who is going who wanted visuals to use, and so they came to see us to have these photos. So these photos can be of use to people. We have this rich iconography which can be of use for passing these memories down, but it's also complicated because we may find ourselves just being a sort of photographic agency selling images, which is something which isn't really our job. So we're trying to organize all of this. And I've been lucky enough to work with local councillors, politicians who have understood the importance of this and have realized that this can be an asset for everybody to be able to benefit from this wealth, because if not, this would all have been broken up in auctions and the population would have been deprived of this collection, which initially I can say this, I really didn't know exactly how I was going to manage with all of this. Now, the consultation is done with more than 50,000 portraits which have been digitalized. People come and use a touch screen, type in the names, and they can see a gallery of portraits to see whether they can find the information, because each portrait is identified with an address. So that's an additional link for their genealogical research. Fécamp is the center of our area, the Pays de Caux area. And people were coming into Fécamp on Saturdays to have their photographs taken on market day. So this visual memory is not just for Fécamp, it's all the villages around the town. And what's quite moving is when you have people coming to see their photographs or rediscovering their photographs from years and years ago. So ultimately, it's a big volume of images, but we're structuring all that little by little to be able to create a portal for perhaps not full consultation, but for us, it is a considerable asset. And in the coming years, we're going to have all these extraordinary digital resources at our disposal. Very good. I see another question that's come in from Aigas Kouskis from Riga in Latvia. I'll translate for you directly. Can you say that this very specific and deeply touching direction of the heritage preservation developed accidentally through the luck of obtaining this collection of negatives? Or was it a planned action by the municipality? And have you hired new kinds of experts and specialists for dealing with this specific heritage? First of all, we're working with the departmental archives for the county. We have scientific information for the conservation of the collections. Then the strategy is what was defined for us by our local politicians, to be attentive, to be vigilant to these private archives, because ultimately my role is to collect public archives generally for the municipality. So here we have these private collections. We've already received some archives from ship owners or ship owning companies. And then as the possibilities arise, what's important also is to know that the public authorities are there to support us, to guide us. So when we bought this archive collection, the Interministerial Department for Archives of France gave us a grant for 50% of the amount. It's a considerable amount. But the collection was considered so interesting. These photographs are so extraordinary, the negatives are so perfect that there is a resource here which exceeds the boundaries of Fécamp. It's much wider in its significance, which enabled us to seize this opportunity because we had already worked with people who were attentive to the work we had done. But it is obviously also a question of luck, because Jean Goumi, the photographer, he was discussing one day with this photographer who sold us the archives, who gave us the portraits, and he said, go and see the municipal archives of Fécamp. This will be of interest to them, and they'll find a solution. So it really is a treasure that we have here, and I invite all my colleagues. And this is something I had to present to the municipality because it's changed our work profoundly. The education department who organize activities with the local schools, use these images and propose them as a teaching resource for workshops and visits in school activities, obviously in digital format. And so you can do things with a computer, with a PowerPoint, and share the images. And the second part of the question, have you had to recruit new kinds of people or experts or specific skills? Well, we've had to learn a bit about digitalization ourselves. So we have, I work with the IT department, which helps us. But what I think is moving here is to see the reaction of the public, of the audience. Immediately the questions start coming, and it's no longer just seen as a gadget or an illustration. This really is a historic source, which is part of their lives. And we've been lucky enough to have almost all of these collections here. Thank you. Is there one last question before we move on to the final presentation? Today's last speaker.
On avait pris un tout petit peu de retard, je vois pas
So
d'autres
as
questions.
we're running a tiny bit late, I will pass on the contact details if anybody wants to contact our speakers, and we'll now move on to our last presenter of the day. Mr. Martin was talking about a sensitive approach to heritage, and that's also something that's being developed with the very cosmopolitan population of Mauritius. We're heading off in a different direction now, a change off to Mauritius, and Vikram Mugon, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, who is in charge of heritage interpretation at the Apravasi Ghat Trust Fund, which conducts a lot of activities to promote heritage and to make sure that local people take ownership of it. And I've asked him to talk more particularly about the Heritage Interpretation Center set up in Port-Louis in Mauritius. So if you could present this place and how it promotes heritage and also shares the memories of the local people. Hello, everybody. I'm Vikram Mugon, and I'm in charge of the Center of Interpretation of the site of Apravasi Ghat, the first site in Mauritius to be UNESCO World Heritage listed in 2006. I would like to thank Cités et Cités Remarquables de France for the opportunity to present Apravasi Ghat, which is not very well known outside our island. I'll share my screen if I can.
Ça arrive progressivement. Ça y est, oui, on le voit.
Yep, it's there. We have it. So just to show you where we are and to present the context to this, Mauritius is a small island in the Indian Ocean, 1,100 kilometers to the east of Madagascar, and about 2,000 square kilometers, not very big, with a population of about 1.3 million people. By its history, Mauritius is multi-ethnic, multi-confessional, multicultural, and multilingual. You see the presentation is in English, and I'm speaking to you in French. We have the two languages. It was colonized in the 16th century by the Dutch, then by the French in the 18th century. With the French, they also brought slavery, mainly from Africa, slaves from Africa, and they came to develop the island. The British took possession of the island at the beginning of the 19th century, 1810. They abolished slavery in 1835. And to make up for the shortage of labor, they experimented what they called the indenture label system. So there were free workers, not slaves, who were engaged on contracts. And this was in 1834. The success of the system in Mauritius encouraged other British colonies and French colonies and Spanish and Dutch colonies to adopt the same indentured labor system. And almost 2.2 million workers migrated around the world to take part in this in the 19th century. Mauritius received 500,000, 500,000 of these migrant workers. So when they arrived in Mauritius, they had to come through Aprawasi Ghat, which was the immigration point where they handled all the formalities linked with immigration into Mauritius. It's in the bay here that you can see here, in the capital of Mauritius. Aprawasi Ghat bears testimony to that experiment. In the 1980s, a part of the site was demolished to make space for a motorway, which you can see here. I'm showing you here with the cursor, and other property development. However, that did make people more aware just afterwards, and in 1987, the remaining part of the site was listed a national monument, and in the Aprawasi Ghat Trust Fund, which is a semi-public body, work under the Ministry for Art and Cultural Heritage was created. So this organization aimed to conduct research into this indentured label system and promote the site and its little known history. So the work began at this period on the conservation of the site and, if possible, to have it listed as UNESCO World Heritage. The team was of people not necessarily trained in heritage issues and working in a way which wasn't entirely compatible with heritage management, which was set up. Heritage was a new subject for the team members, which we weren't necessarily familiar with. The team was supervised initially by experts in heritage issues, not necessarily people from Mauritius. And after that, the same team was encouraged to carry on these studies into heritage in other countries. So some of us went off to work in India or in South Africa or in France or in the United States, and yet others in England. So we were able to go and acquire experience in different parts of the world in order to make sure that we did develop the capacities we needed locally. Here you have some visuals of the site. For example, here we see the heritage masons who were trained at the time by Indian experts. And today, these masons manage to prepare specifications for other sites, and their expertise is also used by other companies to do conservation work all over the island. The Aprawasi Ghat Trust Fund today has about 50 employees, the administrative staff, and also the technical personnel, divided into three parts for the technical personnel. First, there is one team for conservation and maintenance of the site and other related sites linked to indentured labor. Another for research into the subject, and another for promotion and mediation interpretation of heritage. And it is thanks to the efforts of this team that the site of April-Sigat was kept and became the Center for Interpretation, the Bikram Singh Ramlala Interpretation Center, the BRIC. The Center for Interpretation was created. It was one of the main objectives of the April-Sigat Trust Fund when it was created, and another objective in the first management plan, which was submitted to UNESCO in 2006, with the aim being to enable a better understanding of this fragmented site and to enable better visitor management on the site, and also to mitigate the impacts of any growth in the number of tourists coming to visit the site, which is what happened. So the Bikram Singh Ramlala Interpretation Center, the BRIC, was fitted out in a former depot building, which it was transformed into a refrigerated chamber in the 1970s and then bought by the state and used for this project. The rehabilitation of the former warehouse took a variety of skills. It involved museologists, historians, architects, engineers, artists, heritage, specialized restoration workers and masons. So also security staff for the security of the building, and even the board members. Everybody really took part in the project, which became a genuine challenge. The work lasted 6 years, from 2009 to 2014. It required an investment of about 54 million Mauritian rupees, $1.4 million, slightly less in euros, financed entirely by the government of Mauritius. And when I say 6 years, that also includes the whole process of procurement, calls for tender for the rehabilitation of the building, an archaeological dig beforehand, which was done in the center, research for the museography, also research to identify items and artifacts, because people were not necessarily used to donating objects for museums. They didn't necessarily know really what a museum was. Also to develop multimedia materials and mediation activities, recruit mediators, and studies to define what we were going to present to the public in this place. So the museography was designed according to 3 main principles: to present and explain the outstanding university value of the listed site, to present the history and legacy of the indentured laborers, and also to explain the history and evolution, the physical evolution of the place, which changed quite often in its uses over the years. We took account of the results of the survey of the potential audience. We knew, for example, that the public in Mauritius doesn't necessarily want to read a lot of content, a lot of text in a museum. And they didn't want to feel intimidated in a space. People aren't really used to museums as a venue in Mauritius. So we decided to have texts which were kept short and often presented as questions and answers on the questions which emerged during the study of the potential audience and the guided visits which were carried out before the center was created. We stuck to the 2 official languages of the country, the 2 official languages of Mauritius, English and French, to avoid having text all over the place, which might have intimidated the visitors. And for those who really wanted to know more, we installed multimedia terminals in each section of the center. So visitors have the choice of reading everything there, or they can send the information to themselves by email to read it calmly at home when they have time. So we also decided to show large format images of immigrants to remind people of the human history and to establish an emotional link between the visitor and the site itself. So you have these portraits in the interpretation center, which covers about 1,000 square meters. We also chose to present a mock-up, a model. Initially, we thought we would just present the site in multimedia format. But very quickly, we came to realize that people of a certain age were not necessarily back at that time ready to use that format of presentation. And so we tried to integrate the two together so that the older or younger visitors all found something of interest to them. We didn't forget the children either. We wanted parents and children to be able to visit the center together. And therefore, in each section, there is a kids' corner with an entertaining presentation of the same history that the parents are discovering on the panels on the wall. So here, if you look here, there's a little guy here, a figure we borrowed from a cartoon strip, which we developed to explain the site. And so for younger visitors, it was very simple explanations, entertaining explanations so that people could understand the site and the indentured labor system. There are also objects such as millstones here, so that children can discover these old artifacts. And it's often fun to see them trying to see where they have to press to get the millstone to start. So this scenography has also been adapted and integrated as we discovered vestiges and remains during the archaeological dig, some of which are visible in the center. For example, here, a part of the boat here. Here, inside the boat, you can discover the experience of the trip made by the contract workers. And here we can understand the use of the site even before the warehouse was built, back in the days when this place was used as a place for repairing boats which landed here for the dry dock. And these artifacts, all the artifacts that we have found on the site are also presented. They help us to explain the life and activities that existed here, and also to understand, to explain to the peoples of Mauritius that even if Mauritius was very small back in those days, it was really very well connected to the rest of the world. So trying to situate Mauritius in the broader worldwide context of the 19th century through these objects. Vikram, for your information, you have 5 minutes left, no more. Okay, I'll try to go quickly. We also have, of course, objects and documents. And a lot of people came to realize that these objects had value when they came to the museum. Otherwise, these pots are things people often use as flower pots in their garden. So it's interesting for people to realize it has a positive impact. We also decided to use contemporary art to try to elicit, to change the way people consider heritage. For example, through this work of art, the visitors are led to reflect on the fact that these workers were not necessarily victims, as people often imagine, but were also playing an active role in that history. The center proposes several activities, guided visits of the buffer zone around the World Heritage Site, and also activities for children. Here you have some images of those activities. Pottery activities, or telling the children the history of pottery. Here we have another activity where we proposed for children to discover the traditional way of making mortar from lime, but also with ingredients like spices or fruit. Other activities also that we propose. We also have often encounters with members of the community where we discuss with them about their expectations or their view of development for the town. We also work with artists to host temporary exhibitions so that they can show their view, their vision of the site and take ownership of it in a way. We also provide educational materials for the public, quite a lot of resources. Each school in Mauritius now has a kit containing these resources. And all these resources now have also been put online with a Padlet there where you have all the resources and publications, little videos, multimedia materials, also the virtual visit of the site and of the museum. You have all that there. We also have regular activities which are organized, like the International Day of Monuments and Sites or Museums. And this was another festival we organized, took part in, where the whole of Port Louis took part in a festival of light, where we had quite a lot of visitors over 3 days. We had 35,000 visitors in 3 days. And just for the number of visits, this shows the graph here shows the number of visitors we have had from 2,500 visitors in 2000. We reached 86,500 in 2017. And we have an average now of about 50,000 a year. 2016 was that special event where we had 35,000 visitors in 3 days. So apart from that, it's an average of about 50,000 a year. The visitor profile on the opening of the site as an interpretation center, we had 70% people from Mauritius, 30% tourists. Last year, this had changed. We now have about 56% visitors from outside of Mauritius and the rest people from Mauritius. And we get lots of good feedback from our visitors who leave their messages. And we did a survey in 2016, 96% of people in Mauritius are aware of Sigat, whereas before, when we used to do surveys and people asked people weren't familiar with it. So I think all the work that has been done and all the mediation activities in these venues have helped to make the place better known. And the listing of the site and the development of the interpretation center, of course, helps people to understand indentured labor better, but enables us better to see the potential heritage can have for the region around the site and the center. For example, here, you see the site is there, and that is the center here before it was rehabilitated. Now we're talking about creating an art district and installing other buildings and perhaps safeguarding some other old buildings here. These buildings, for example, you have the building here, which will soon have a museum on slavery. And here there are plans to develop a contemporary art gallery. We do know, however, that we still have a lot to do, and we can learn from the experience of our colleagues around the world. And I think that's why it's a good opportunity for us to be able to exchange these ideas here. So there you have it, our experience at Sigat. Thank you. Thank you, Vikram, for that presentation. It wasn't too long, no, that was perfect. In any case, to have presented the place and the activities you're doing there, the way it was built, and also the feedback you're getting from the different visitors. So heritage interpretation centers like this are something which have emerged a lot, first of all, in the English-speaking world, in Northern Europe and now in France. France has developed a certain number of this centers, like this interpretation centers of architecture and heritage, often through partnerships with the Ministry for Culture. But we wanted not just to present French experiences, but also to show what other international partners have set up. So thank you very much for that presentation. I think that is a very inspiring experience. We have slightly gone over time, so I propose that perhaps we don't allow too long for questions, but we can take a one. Does anybody are there any questions? Not comments. Does everyone has a question that they would like to ask Vikram from our international participants? In that case, I will ask one while we're waiting for others to come in. Today, Gat, in its very design, is it designed more for the local people first, or more for the exterior visitors from outside, or was the idea from the beginning to cover both? First of all, we wanted to be a site for people in Mauritius. The studies, the surveys we did at the beginning really were of local people in Mauritius. It was designed for them, first and foremost. Obviously, after that, we do take account. We did expect to have tourists. So we did also think of them, but it was more for the people of Mauritius. And it's nice to see that the Mauritians do come and come back. We get quite a lot of repeat visits. I'm not from Mauritius, but I would really like to come and discover this site, Vikram. I'm sure you'll have made many of the participants want to come and visit. Are there any other questions? Perhaps Georges Ouedraogo? Thank you, Vikram. I would like to know,
à la différence de l'intervenant qui est passé tout à l'heure, Vous avez par rapport
Unlike
aux différents projets,
earlier,
est-ce
with the
que
different
ces projets-là
portraits,
permettent à des familles
do the
ou bien à des
portraits
communautés
enable
de se
families
rencontrer?
or communities to know each
En
other?
fait, tous ces portraits à l'origine avaient été faits
All the
à
portraits
Wassigat parce
were
que c'était
done
un dépôt
because
d'immigration.
it was an
Et
immigration depot,
grâce à ces
and
documents qui ont
all
été
thanks to those
aujourd'hui
documents which are today
dans les
are
archives
kept
pour
in the
les autres endroits,
archives in another
pas à
place,
Wassigat maintenant,
not at
les gens
Aprosigat.
arrivent à
People do
retracer leur
manage
généalogie.
to trace
Et
back their
aujourd'hui, il y
family
a à peu
history,
près 40 000
and there
personnes
are about
qui,
40,000
ont
families
retracé leur généalogie,
who have traced back their
retracé leur
roots, their
généalogie. Il y a d'autres
genealogy,
qui sont dans le même pays,
others who have even
dans le
gone
pays d'origine,
further and off to the
retrouver leur
countries of
famille.
origin to find where their families were.
Merci. Je transmets une
Thank
autre
you very
question qui
much.
a
I'll
été
transmit
adressée.
another
Est-ce que
question that's come
les
in through the
Monténégrins et
chat.
les Mauriciens
Do
ont
you
adopté
think
ce
that
lieu comme lieu
the
de mémoire?
Mauritians have adopted this place as a place of
Alors,
memory?
je vais essayer de répondre. C'est une question assez
It's
compliquée,
a
mais je vais essayer de répondre
complicated
par le
question, but I'll
suivant.
try to answer by saying that
Selon les sondages qu'on a fait en
according to the
2016
surveys we
et
did in
2018,
2016 and
87% des
2018,
Mauriciens connaissent
96% of the Mauritians are
et souhaitent
familiar
quand même
with the sites
venir
and want to come
visiter ce
to
lieu.
visit the site, the
Et
place.
voilà un petit peu, je pense.
So I think,
Oui, ça
yes,
donne bien
it gives an
effectivement
idea.
l'idée par rapport au
Yes,
hasard de
that does.
rentrée où les gens ne
So
connaissaient pas
perhaps
le lieu. Tout à
this,
fait.
and that's
Moi,
impressive in a place that
personnellement,
people weren't familiar with before.
j'ai une
In
question
any
pour
case,
le
thank you,
sujet
Vikram.
qu'on peut s'arrêter là
We're
pour
going to
aujourd'hui.
stop there for
Merci
today.
pour cette très riche
Thank you
intervention
for
et
that
merci aux
very
différents
interesting
intervenants
presentation. Thank you
français
to the different
d'aujourd'hui.
French
Voilà qui
presenters
ont
also
témoigné de
today,
cette dimension
everybody
centrale
who
du
has
rôle du
talked
patrimoine
about
dans
the
l'idée
role of
de cité,
heritage,
du rôle
even if we have
du
extended it
patrimoine
here
dans
to
la
other issues,
médiation et dans la
in
participation
mediation
citoyenne.
and
Comment
grassroots
faire que le
participation of
patrimoine
citizens. How can
finalement
we make
soit un outil d'appropriation
heritage a tool
et
for
dans votre
taking
sens,
ownership of
comment
our past?
eh bien, faire en sorte que
And how
les
can
habitants
we
s'approprient ce
have local
patrimoine?
people
C'est un
take
enjeu qu'on
ownership of
va
that
essayer de
heritage? It's
développer
a challenge we'll
effectivement
be
dans
looking
cette
into again
discussion
tomorrow for our
avec
final session
deux intervenants
with
français,
two
une
French
intervenante internationale,
presentations,
une autre
one
femme d'une
international
dispositif
presentation
qui offre
showing
lieu,
different
chantiers participatifs
places,
qui ont été mis en place
activities,
dans ces
things that have been
différentes
set up
langues
in
en
different
France, dans
territories
l'Est
in
et en
France,
Auvergne, et puis enfin
in the
oui,
east and in the center of
merci
France
toutes et
and
tous
in Lebanon. I would like to
d'avoir
thank
contribué. Merci
everybody
à
for your
Solène
attention.
Colombier
Thank you
également qui
to
a participé
Solène
avec
Colonier, who
l'élaboration
helped
du contenu
me
de
to
de
put
la
together the
journée. Et je vous
content
dis
of the
donc
day. And
à demain
I
pour
will
la
see you
sixième et
all
dernière
tomorrow
session de
for the
cette
sixth
formation
and
internationale.
final day
Excellente
of
journée à
the
tous. Au
international
revoir.
training. Have a good evening.